So this is a very sad subject, and it's quite a cause célèbre here in the UK. There was a murder of a young woman called Sarah Everard. She was murdered by an off-duty policeman who used his warrant card, his identification documents and his official handcuffs, it seems, to falsely arrest Miss Everard on a contravention of COVID lockdown rules as she was walking home. It was a pretty dreadful case, the details of which I cannot go into because of YouTube restrictions, but I'm sure you know about it anyway. So now that the murderer, Wayne Couzens, has been found guilty and committed to prison for the rest of his life, there have been calls for the removal from office of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick. Okay, for those of you watching this from the safety of a far foreign country, that really is her name. Now, the Dame bit is a title given to a woman who is knighted, so it's the female equivalent of Sir. But the rest, well, I have rarely heard such a good example of nominative determinism as that. I did once hear testimony in court of a policeman called Sergeant Constable. No, I'm absolutely serious, that was his name. I'll bet he was overjoyed when he got his promotion to sergeant, because before that he would have been constable. Okay, but look, I wasn't here to be funny. There have been calls for Dame Cressida to step down from office. Actually, I think she should, but not because of this dreadful case. She's just a rotten police commissioner. But in this case, the police themselves did quite well. Apparently, I've read that random stranger murders are very difficult to solve for obvious reasons. And they caught this one in about 3 or 4 days. And then he was he was in a magistrate's court within 10 days. It's what went on before that's the problem, you see. And I'm not sure that that's really Dame Cressida's fault either. All of Wayne Couzens' colleagues knew he was a weirdo and they didn't say anything. He acted badly around his female colleagues. They didn't want to be, alone with him. And the male officers actually nicknamed him the rapist because of his creepy behaviour. But the women apparently didn't report him or didn't do it with enough strength. And I suppose because of a mixture of not wishing to cause a stir and possibly even believing that the male officers wouldn't back them up. And the male officers just joked about him being the rapist. All the signs were there. The only problem was that Couzens' colleagues didn't raise his behaviour as an issue. So you might say that the top brass wouldn't have had a clue about it. Now, you can say they should make reporting suspicions about colleagues more easy, but, that's difficult too. I'm not saying it can't be dealt with. What I am saying is it's difficult because police are a mutual support society, aren't they? They have to watch out for each other. And this would create a very closely knit group. And I don't see how easy it will be for one of them to report another in that sort of situation. Anyway, that's the first thing. But what I really wanted to talk about was the frenzy of outrage that has accompanied this particular incident, without in any way belittling the ordeal of the victim, which must have been horrendous, and the hideous pain of the family, which will go on forever. Miss Everard is one of about 250 women who every year meet an untimely end at the hands of a murderer. And before I get on to the number of men who are murdered, I'll just go through a few of notable cases I turned up while I was researching this video. A Muslim woman called Sarah Hussein was burnt to death in the street by male relatives. Did I hear hysterical calls for return of the death penalty when they caught the perpetrators? No. Were there any vigils in her memory? Well, not that I know of. Actually, I haven't even been able to find the names of the 3 men involved, except that they were relatives of hers, so possibly of the same Pakistani heritage, which leads me to believe that probably it was something to do with some sort of what they call honour killing. Then in June 2020, 2 sisters, Nicole Smallman and Biba Henry, were murdered while out in the park after a party to celebrate a birthday. Again, the police acted quickly and they caught the murderer, which is again a remarkable achievement because they were in an isolated part of the park. And the murderer was a total stranger. There was nothing to connect him to them. It turned out to be a young psychopath who believed he'd made a pact with the devil to win the lottery by sacrificing women. In this case, we do have a picture of the 18-year-old murderer. I do wonder whether his ethnic background might have something to do with the national fuss about this dreadful case. No calls for the death penalty, no vigils in the park. Well, I don't know, it might have been a few friends, but nothing that captured the national attention. 2 sisters at the same time. Imagine the pain of their mother. Again, all credit to the police. As I said, a stranger murder is a real problem to solve. And this was even more random than the Everard case. At least Ms. Everard was abducted from a street where there was CCTV. Then there's Sabina Nessa, randomly murdered in a 5-minute walk from her flat to the local pub. Where was the vigil of women in the park? Where was the national outrage and the calls for the death penalty? The point is that these murders are used or not used according to the political whim of the various pressure groups who latch onto them. Sarah Everard was a good-looking young woman who resembled the type of person that journalists would have had for friends. As indeed, I should think that she was a marketing executive. She probably did have friends in the press. She might have known a whole lot of journalists. So they would have been more inclined to report on her case with more personal feeling. Now, for some statistics. This is from an organisation called End Femicide, and it gives the figures to 2020. I suppose for that previous year. 62 of the murders of women were committed by a woman's current or former partner. Well, 15% of women were killed by men they knew, and 1 in 12 of those murders were by strangers. This is an organisation, a group of some sort called End Femicide, and I strongly object to that. Homicide. The killing of men and women, that's what we've got to end. It's not that women are particularly targeted. Hang on, I've got some figures here. Of all the women murdered up to March 2020, 1 in 12 was killed by a stranger, total stranger. And the figures I got from a government website giving homicide figures were that 241 females were killed in the year ending 2019. And I promised you the stats for men, didn't I? In the same year, 429 males were killed. That's about double. The UK has a homicide rate of 11 per million. 15 per million are males and 8 per million are females. We have to remember that there are certain groups which just love to push a narrative. The left will use a murder as evidence of racism, or in this case, the evil of the police, because that man was an off-duty policeman. The right might use it for evidence of foreigners killing our women. Women's groups like End Femicide will use it for evidence of male violence. And, you know, considering that men are so much stronger than women, it seems to me that if men really were the murderous stinkers such groups as End Femicide seem to wish to portray, then there would be a lot more than 8 per million. What was it? 11 per million. Yeah, 8 per million. As horrible as any of these crimes are, this is not an epidemic. Any murder is dreadful, of course. We have to do our best to stop any murder of anybody, male or female. And the police can be criticised because it seems to be quite obvious that they're rather more busy policing tweets and Instagrams than preventing some of these awful crimes going on in the street where the police should be. But still, it's not an epidemic. But the media really do like their epidemics, don't they? Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.